Jack the Ripper has a name now, and it isn't the one anyone wanted. After 137 years, scientists say DNA from a blood-soaked shawl finally closed the case. But the shawl passed through dozens of hands. The stain proves a sexual act and not a murder, and the chain of custody is broken. The most unsettling part isn't the science at all. The police already had the name in 1888. To understand that, we have to forget the most famous piece of evidence for a moment. Everyone knows the Dear Boss letter, the taunting message sent to a London news agency that mocked the police and promised more to come. It was signed with a name that would echo through history, Jack the Ripper. Before that letter, the killer had no name at all. He was just the Whitechapel murderer. A single sheet of paper turned a local criminal into a global legend. The problem is that almost every expert now agrees that the letter was a fake, probably written by a journalist at the Star to sell more papers. And it worked perfectly. It created a media circus and sent the police on a wild goose chase through thousands of copies and copycat letters. Weeks of wasted manpower chasing a fabrication. The man with the pen had more influence on the investigation than the killer himself. And that's exactly where the trick at the heart of this whole case lies. While the public fixated on an invented letter and wild theories about brilliant surgeons, mad artists, and even Prince Albert Victor, a grandson of Queen Victoria, the real answer lay elsewhere. Not in a dramatic confession, but in a few dull, forgotten police documents that nobody wanted to believe, precisely because they promised no sensation. No conspiracy, no royalty, just paperwork. The first of those documents is an internal memo from 1894. While the newspapers were going wild, the senior men on the case were quietly building their own short list. Chief Constable Melville McNaughton wrote one such list of suspects, and at the very top sat a name that would never sell books or films, Kosminski. McNaughton described him as a man with a strong homicidal tendency and a deep aversion to women, someone who, in his view, could very well be the killer. But McNaughton made one striking mistake, and that mistake matters more than it seems. He noted that Kosminski had died, when in fact the man was still very much alive. He would not die until 1919. Remember that detail. It shows just how messy and unreliable the sources that the entire modern case still leans on are. Even the officer who wrote the name down did not have the basic facts about his own suspect straight. The second document is more intimate and far more chilling. Chief Inspector Donald Swanson oversaw the entire Ripper investigation from beginning to end. He was on the ground every single day and saw everything up close. Years after he retired, he received a copy of his former boss, Robert Anderson's memoirs. In the margin, right next to the passage about the Ripper, he scribbled a private note in pencil. In it, he wrote what he had never made public, that the perpetrator was Kosminski, the man who was sent to an asylum and died there. That's not a headline and not a theory to sell books. It's a handwritten note that was never meant for other eyes. The man who ran the investigation confirmed a name to himself quietly and in private. And the pattern is already there. It's exactly this kind of forgotten document. Not a letter from the killer, but a few lines about him that brought the case closest to an answer. It lay under the dust in the margin of a book for decades, while the whole world looked the wrong way, at the screaming fake letter instead of the quiet, real trail. So who was Aaron Kosminski? No criminal mastermind and no monster from a movie. A 23-year-old barber who in 1881 had fled with his family from Poland, then part of the Russian Empire, to the East End to escape the brutal pogroms. He was local, and that was precisely the point. A predator did not need to be a genius. He only needed to know the alleys, the shadows, and the escape routes. And he lived right in the middle of the places where the murders happened. He was also deeply ill. According to modern experts, he likely suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, plagued by auditory hallucinations and dark visions. In 1891, his own family had him committed after he threatened his sister with a knife. First, he went to Colney Hatch, later to Leavesden. He never came out again and died in 1919 of gangrene, buried at East Ham Cemetery. And here is the detail that makes the timeline so seductive. The murder stopped exactly when Kosminski was taken off the streets. For many, that is the clincher. But a coinciding timeline is not proof of guilt. It is a clue. And those two things get confused over and over in this story. There was even a witness at the time who identified him. But that witness then refused to testify, which left the police with little choice but to let him go. To understand why he got away, you have to see the world around him. The Whitechapel of 1888 was not the city of top hats and carriages you see in the movies. It was a tale of two cities. While the rich lived in grand houses in the West, the East End was one of the most overcrowded, diseased, and desperate places on earth. More than 900,000 people were crammed into a few square miles, a tangled mess of narrow, unlit streets, dark alleys, and hidden courtyards. In some spots, more than 1,000 people lived on a single acre, and the air itself was toxic. A thick yellow fog of river mist and black coal smoke from thousands of chimneys choked the city, sometimes so dense you could not see your own hand in front of your face. It was the perfect cover for a predator. At the heart of that world stood the doss houses, filthy lodging places where, for a few pennies, you could rent a bed or even just a spot on the floor. Some offered a 4-penny coffin, a coffin-shaped box to sleep in. Others had only a rope strung across the room that men leaned over as they slept standing up. The women who became the victims, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were not glamorous figures. They were poor, often middle-aged, desperate women who had to walk the streets late in the fog and the dark just to scrape together the price of a bed. The police were hopeless, and not only because of the fog. Forensic science as we know it simply did not exist. No fingerprints, no blood typing, no radios, only a whistle and a wooden stick. They interviewed more than 2,000 people and detained at least 80 men, and still they failed. The concept of a sealed crime scene was brand new, so the moment a body was found, bystanders and reporters rushed in and trampled every trace within minutes. One time, they did find something concrete. Near the spot where Catherine Eddowes lay, the same woman from the famous shawl, they found a cut piece of her bloody apron, and on the wall above it, someone had scrawled a cryptic, anti-Semitic line in chalk. Was it a clue from the killer? Was the Jewish Kosminski trying to frame his own community? Or was it just random graffiti? We will never know, and that is no accident. Commissioner Charles Warren feared the message would spark anti-Semitic riots and ordered it wiped away immediately. So one of the few pieces of physical evidence they ever found was washed off with water before anyone could photograph it. The case was hampered not only by a lack of technology, but also by the politics of the moment. And then there is that other letter, the real one. Because while the fake Dear Boss letter was swallowing all the headlines, a far grimmer package arrived for George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. It was called the From Hell letter, and inside the accompanying box was half of a preserved human kidney. The sender claimed it came from one of the victims and that he had fried and eaten the other half. And here is where it turns blood-chilling. Catherine Eddowes was missing a kidney, which the killer had removed during the murder. Nobody can say with certainty whether that kidney was really hers, but the detail fits eerily well, and the pattern repeats. The piece that screamed loudest for attention, the "Dear Boss" letter, was fake. The piece that may have actually mattered arrived quietly in a box and was largely dismissed. Just like McNaughton's memo and Swanson's pencil note, the truth kept sitting in the margin, while the spectacle filled the front pages. Now jump more than 100 years forward, to the evidence the modern headlines lean on. In 2007, a businessman and amateur sleuth, Russell Edwards, bought a stained silk shawl at auction that, according to the story, had lain beside Catherine Eddowes' body and had been kept in the family of a policeman who was at the scene. Edwards is convinced it is the real thing, and he stakes his money and his reputation on it. He gives the shawl to Dr. Jari Louhelainen of Liverpool, John Moores University. It is an enormous gamble. This is a piece of silk over 125 years old, handled by countless hands, exposed to time and the elements. Getting anything usable out of it at all was considered a miracle. The team focuses on stains and extracts mitochondrial DNA, the kind that passes almost unchanged from mother to child and therefore persists for a long time. They track down a living descendant of Eddowes' sister, Karen Miller, and compare her DNA to the blood on the shawl. According to Louhelainen, the first test came in at 99.2%, and because DNA has two complementary strands, they tested the second strand, which he says gave a perfect 100% match. So the shawl had been real, they said, soaked in the victim's blood. Then, they did the same with a descendant of Kosminski, using a semen stain. Again, they say, a match. The results were published in 2019 in the Journal of Forensic Sciences. And here's where the case you hear presented everywhere as closed falls apart. Because this shiny evidence is the most poorly supported of all. Start with the famous match to the victim. Louhelainen leaned on a mutation he called 314.1C and labeled it extremely rare, roughly 1 in 290,000 people. That sounds like a needle in a haystack, a fingerprint. But other DNA scientists pointed out an error in the naming. The mutation should not be called 314.1C, but 315.1C. And 315.1C is anything but rare. More than 99% of people carry it. So the supposed needle in the haystack turned out to be just hay. In October 2024, a study made this public, and 4 heavyweights in the DNA world concluded that the match was not significant at all. Without a reliable link between the shawl and the victim, the entire case against Kosminski collapses. On top of that comes the fundamental problem with mitochondrial DNA. Experts like Hansi Weissensteiner and Walter Parson of the University of Innsbruck are crystal clear about it. This type of DNA can only exclude someone, not pinpoint them. It is shared by thousands of people in the same maternal line. So the DNA on the shawl could be Kosminski's, but it could just as easily belong to thousands of other Londoners from that time. And to top it off, the researchers never published the actual DNA sequences. Instead, they showed colored boxes, citing privacy law. Without that raw data, critics say, no outsider can check or reproduce the result. And then the objections that the viewers themselves are already raising. The shawl is more than 130 years old and has passed through the hands of the police, the original owner's family, collectors, and Edwards' own team before it ever saw a sterile lab. On top of that, descendants of both Eddowes and Kosminski had been near the shawl. Breathe once anywhere near that fabric, and you leave your own DNA behind. There is no chain of custody. And even if the semen were Kosminski's, a semen stain proves at most that a sexual act once took place, not that he murdered anyone. In no courtroom would this hold up. That's not a detail, that's the core of it. And yet the case is more alive right now than ever, and that's the part almost nobody tells you. Edwards and the victim's relatives don't want another headline. They want a legal verdict. They're applying for a new inquest in the Eddowes case to have Kosminski formally named as the murderer. Karen Miller, a direct descendant, puts it sharply. The name Jack the Ripper has become a brand, and, as a result, the real victims have been forgotten. In 2022, the then Attorney General Michael Ellis refused permission, citing insufficient new evidence. Now the request sits with his successor, Richard Hermer. The East London coroner, Nadia Persaud, has already indicated she would not oppose the application. For the first time in 130 years, a court could weigh all the evidence, including that contested DNA, and could enter an official name into the records. The strangeness of this story comes down to a single inversion. The sensational evidence, the taunting letter, and the shiny DNA match in the headlines are precisely the evidence that holds up worst. And the boring evidence, an internal memo and a pencil scribble in the margin, is what brought the case closest to an answer all along. The police didn't know more than we think they did, but they didn't know less either. They had a name. They had a witness who pointed to him and then refused to testify. And they had a man who was locked away for good at exactly the right moment. No DNA, no trial, just those quiet documents in the margin. So, proof or superstition? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more mysteries.